But let's start with Tracy now. Tracy, thank you for willing to set aside this hour. I know that you've got a call scheduled at 9 o'clock, so we will make sure that you're done in time for that. We are recording this session that Tracy's going to provide, but we will stop the recording at some point, and we can also edit out stuff that is personal. So don't let that be an inhibiting factor for sharing this morning. We do love hearing from our alumni, and it'll be great to hear not just Tracy's immediate experience, but really going back further, a lot of her life story. And I think we're going to be able to find points of contact with what she shares. I'm sure there'll be quite a bit that resonates. So Tracy will speak 10 to 15 minutes, then we'll transition into some general discussion with the group and be finished by 9 o'clock. So that's the plan. Tracy's going to share a bit about her own story, so I won't rehash her CV. So rather than that, I'll pass over to you, Tracy. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you for the welcome back. It was a great group and played a big role for me during my transition. So I'm very happy to share my journey. And there's no content today. It's more about sharing the journey and the highs, the lows of transitioning. And there are many of each. And really how I dealt with them. It is a tough time for many. It can be a very proactive time. It can be a very beneficial time, but it's getting the most out of it. And I didn't always do that. So hopefully some of the things I didn't do correctly, you can share about, learn from my experience. So, but firstly, I'd just like to give you a little bit of an introduction to myself and my journey, and particularly my journey as a Christian, because I think that gives a lot of context to where I'm at now. I'm not going to go into major detail, but I didn't grow up in a Christian household. I grew up in the UK, as you can probably hear, in the north of England, in Yorkshire. I was a teenager through the miners' strike in a Yorkshire, not a mining village, but very close in the middle of all the mining area. So politics played a big role. So my dad was a lifetime member of the Labour Party in the UK, and he'd worked in manufacturing and those sorts of roles. So pretty blue collar background. So I suppose really my Christian journey began when I moved to Australia. I moved in 1996 as a single individual. I've been in a relationship all through my 20s that I thought would lead to marriage, and it didn't. So then it was time to take stock. So I moved to Australia as a single person. I got the opportunity through my current employer to come and set up a division in Australia. At the ripe old age of 29, I was a business unit director, which was great. And it was a great opportunity. And that was a 1-year posting initially. I thought, great, time to, refresh, take stock, and a break from the situation, having had a long-term relationship breakup. Then I stayed for an extra year, and the rest is history. I've been here 26 years in August. So, yeah. So I started going, I'm a singer as well. You can't tell, I'm a bit croaky this morning, but I'm a singer. And one of the first things I did to, I suppose, assimilate and find my feet in Australia is I auditioned for Sydney Philharmonia, thinking, if I don't get in, I'll do something else. But I got in, and that was actually quite life-changing in terms of the circles, the friendships, the common shared interests. And it was a complete antithesis to what I did during the day. So it was a really good balance. So what happened there is one of my friends at Sydney Philharmonia was my buddy, and I was invited to share Christmas with them because I didn't know anybody in Australia. So my first Christmas, and I went along to their church, which was an Anglican church in Vaucluse. Some of you may know it, the Sydney people, St. Michael's. And I wasn't a Christian, but she says, "Oh, come along, make up the number in the choir, have a sing," all those sorts of things. So I did that. But as I started to attend that church a little bit more regularly. And at first I started, I suppose, to open my mind to what the message I was hearing, as well as just singing. And then really, I just got moved and I opened my heart and became a Christian. So, and I was confirmed. This is quite a funny story. So I just sung Brahms Requiem at the Sydney Town Hall, dressed all in black. and I had to dash to my confirmation service. And the young girls and boys there, the girls were all in white dresses and the boys were in white shirts and ties, and the bishop did this. I was the only adult being confirmed that day, and I was head to foot in black from head to toe. So the bishop actually did make a comment to the whole congregation, said, "Is this symbolic? What are you trying to tell us here?" So, but that was a sort of nice story. So that was the start of my Christian journey just over 20 years ago, probably about 22, 23 years ago now. And that was my church all the way through until I moved to Queensland in January this year. So, and searching for a church is quite challenging at times. But professionally, I've got an accounting background. So I studied CIMA in the UK, maths degree, and then CIMA. And I ended up working in accountancy for quite a few years before moving into recruitment, because I was never really a pure numbers person. I was very people focused. And that role just evolved. I ended up running a division in the UK and got the opportunity to come up. I actually set up Hayes Executive in Australia. But again, it morphed and just evolved over time into more org development, because I started talking to clients about, well, what about, it wasn't just the recruitment. I wouldn't take a brief. We'd talk about the whole organization and what they needed to do. So it just evolved into more organizational development, change management, business transition. And I had my own consulting practice here, initially with a partner who subsequently retired. But really what I did there is facilitate the agenda. So businesses going through transition. I worked with small to medium, majority privately owned, and pretty much getting if there's 2 or 3 owners of a business, getting them on the same page, because often transition, they've got different ideas about which direction they want to go in. The elephant in the room was a good thing to sort of deal with up front, and really facilitating and addressing those difficult issues. Never being afraid to challenge the status quo, because particularly businesses that are long established, they have their way of doing things and their view of the world. So that was interesting work, and I did that for about 8 or 9 years, but it culminated, and this was timely, in a role that was a consulting assignment that became a 3-year gig as a chief operating officer for a software technology business. And that was to get them ready for sale over a longer period of time, both internally and also financially. But then COVID hit, and I actually managed that business through COVID, because the owner was in his early 70s, he'd gone to New Zealand, got stuck there and decided to stay there because he'd just bought a house there with his retirement plan. So I pretty much ran that business for 3 years. And I thought, this is great. What do I want to do? But during the time, I'd been sort of feeling increasingly called to move into the Christian sector. And my first move in this area, in this direction, was actually joining the board of Wesley Mission, or Wesley Community Services, which I have the great privilege of working with Sam on that board. So it's been great to get to know Sam over the last year or so. And that's evolved over time. I started off as a non-exec director, then got involved with the governance committee. I'm now co-deputy chair and also chair of finance and audit. So that evolves, and that is just such wonderful work to do. It's hard work at times. There's some very difficult decisions, but ultimately it is wonderful to make a difference in people's lives. And I resonated with this, and this probably called me closer to working in that sector whilst working in the commercial sector, called me closer to doing God's work. And I felt increasingly called. And Wesley, you all know this, Sam has a fantastic philosophy. It's very simple. It's do all the good you can because every life matters. So, and I resonate with that in everything I do. So, but last July, in July 21, the owner of the business where I was consulting pretty much just said, no, I'm coming back. I'm going to run it myself. I'm not ready to sell. I'm not going to go ahead with this. So he took the reins back and I exited. It was quite amicable. But then that's when I was like shocked. In my whole career, I'd never been out of work. I'd never really had to look for a job because things had just evolved through contact. And the way I think I was shell shocked, but I was also a bit rudderless for a time. And some of you may relate to that, particularly if it was you're transitioning because of other people's decisions rather than your own. So I suppose what I did then is start to have conversations. I allowed myself the time and the space to really try to work out what I wanted to do. And do I want to change direction and focus completely in the Christian nonprofit sector? What do I want to do? Do I want roles on boards? Do I want to take an executive role? I really was at a sort of crossroads and not quite sure what to do. And my network here, whilst all my family are in the UK and they're very supportive in some ways, my professional network's been predominantly friends and colleagues. So what I did is started having conversations, and it was through a conversation that I came across this group. And it was somebody that had not been to it, but we heard of it and recommended it. And that was actually fabulous. So other support networks, I suppose, it's having the conversations. I really did not know what I wanted to do. And sometimes I prayed hard, I talked to people, I sought advice, but I was confused for quite some time. I suppose I knew I wanted to make a transition, and I was sort of, the role finishing at the software company catapulted me into that to say, okay, now's the time to make your decision. Where do you want to go? But it was not, the timing was not on my terms. So I wasn't quite ready. And it was quite tricky. So mentally, the mental health side of it was quite challenging. And I'm sure many of you have gone through that when you really focus and you know that you've got capabilities and skills to bring to the table. Yet you go through in a recruitment process and you come so close. You miss out, you get down to the final two. So in some respects, it was soul destroying. But in other respects, it opened doors and created opportunities. But I was frustrated at times. I was anxious because I'd never been out of work. It was my first ever career break, but really, I couldn't enjoy it. So I was too guilty. It was like, no, I should be doing something. Every time I thought, okay, I'm going to take an afternoon off, I'm going to go for a walk, I felt guilty doing it. And I really could not enjoy the time that I had. So it's that chicken and egg situation. I now had time, but I couldn't enjoy the spare time that I got. So I suppose used the time to reflect, but I was very active. I applied through lots of jobs. I was on CMA Connect and looking at board roles. And I missed out on quite a few, came close, because I'd not had the background in that sector. Going for relatively senior roles, I did miss out on quite a few. And at the time, each one I took quite personally and was quite a jolt, but it got easier over time. I'm not saying I got complacent, but it just got easier to deal with and maybe rationalize through that process of rejection. Because rejections, we're human beings. We want to be liked, we want to be loved, we want to be accepted. And rejection is very hard to deal with. So I suppose one of the quotes that came to mind, I'm just going to read you. I'm a planner, a great planner by background. And this I couldn't plan. I could plan my activities, but I couldn't plan the outcomes because it was almost in other people's hands. And one of the quotes I used from Proverbs, chapter 16, verse 3, which is, commit to the Lord whatever you do, and he will establish your plans. And I used to recite that to myself so many times because it seemed very meaningful, but it kept reminding me when my human side came in and it was like, oh no, I need to do this. And it's just reflect back. And I tried to take stock. One of the things I found really helpful is journaling. So I don't know how many people keep a journal, personal journal. Anybody? Yeah, it's a few people. I actually kept two. I kept my faith journal, and I still do this today, and then my thought journal. And the thought journal was the feelings of rejection, how I felt when I got bad news, how I felt when I got good news, like you've got a second interview, you shortlisted, all those sorts of things. I found that really, really powerful. But reach out, don't let yourself sit at home. I mean, that was easier said than done during COVID because you couldn't really do anything else, but became the master at Zoom meetings. But explore what's out there, have conversations with people, because I'd say the majority of people in this room are very experienced, have held senior roles, and probably, and Jeannie and Daniel, you might comment on this, but I'd say that probably half of you will get your next role through your networks, not through recruitment advertising. At least half, if not more. So have those conversations, reach out to your network. I almost felt a sense of embarrassment and failure because I'd always been this highly accomplished, capable person. I was an organizer, a planner, give it to Tracy because she'll make it happen. And then I felt like, oh, I have no value. I'm not working, I'm not employed. Those thoughts were really, really strong and they were hard to overcome. So, but this group was great, practical and mutual support, people going through the same journey. But just use your networks and have conversations. I set myself a target to have at least one external, at that stage we were in COVID, so one external conversation a day. It could be just a friend if I didn't have a professional one, but reach out to your networks. And people are very supportive. It surprised me, there's a level of support. And some of it was just moral support. Others was face support. Others were actually more practical in terms of, oh, well, you need to speak to so-and-so. And it just opened up that conversation. It's that ripple effect. And you need to sort of focus on that. So with the value of hindsight, it was a difficult period, but it was also a growth period from a character point of view and resilience and all those sorts of things. So my advice is stick with it. My role that I took on alongside a move. So lots of things happened late last year, beginning of this year. I moved to Queensland, so that was an interstate move. So selling a house in Sydney, buying a house here, moving interstate, broke my shoulder, which is not great when you're moving. It's a little bit difficult. So, but that was quite a big physical incapacity. But I then started my current role as Chief Exec Officer of World Hope International, which was 2.5 days a week, small organization. But I thought, yeah, that suits me. It's a remote role, can work from home. It's a Christian organization. It's actually founded under the Wesleyan Church, but my brief is to come in and grow it. And it's already sort of happening. And I'm moving to 4 days a week from the 1st of July. I've been pretty much working that anyway. And this is it. I suppose what I learned looking back, I've now got my ideal scenario. I've got a 4-day week exec role, which I absolutely love. And it's part of an international alliance. So I have a lot of challenges with managing diaries, with times of meetings and things like that, with Cambodia, Philippines, and the States and Canada. So, but that's there. And then I've also got my Wesley board, which takes up 2 to 3 days a month. So I've got a nice semi-portfolio. It's a small portfolio. I don't know how that will evolve in the future. My ideal is to move towards a full board portfolio to give a lot of flexibility. But I suppose if I look back through that period, the main thing I learned is that God has his own plan for me and that I need to trust in that and to have faith in myself and to keep an open mind, because I never thought I'd end up in this role, but just the open-mindedness of it's been really, really beneficial, and I'm really pleased with the role. So I suppose that's my journey. And the only other thing, I'll sort of close my little talk by saying a quote from Corrie ten Boom. And excuse me, I'm a bit croaky this morning. So Corrie ten Boom, one of her, you may be familiar with this, but never be afraid to trust an unknown future to a known God. And that's one that supported me all the way through because it's so poignant. And you may know the story of Corrie ten Boom. I'm not going to recite that to you now, but look, she was an amazing woman. So look her up if you're not familiar with it. But that quote, keep an open mind, because whatever you think you're going to do, it might not be what you end up doing. So, and a friend said to me once, whatever your plans are, just screw them up and throw them out the window, because God knows what you're going to be doing next. Yeah. So I suppose that's my story. So I'm happy to open up to questions, thoughts, or if people want to share their journey. So.
Thank you so much, Tracy. I can recommend reading a bit further on in Proverbs chapter 16 to verse 9, which does underscore the last point you made about being ready to throw your plans in the bin. Always good to plan, but plan lightly. Thank you for that. Well, let's turn to a time of general conversation. I might just kick off with a question, and then please, everyone else, participate. You mentioned that you felt guilty going for a walk at some point. Again, in the benefit of hindsight, the unknown, of course, is how long this period of uncertainty was going to last. But do you think there's a different way you could have approached that you didn't feel guilty?
Yeah, I wish I'd not. Looking back, hindsight's a wonderful thing, because now I'm so busy, and I would love to go for a walk on an afternoon and take the dogs and that sort of thing, as opposed to squeezing it in between meetings. My husband is better at this than me, and I don't know if it's a male-female thing, but I couldn't compartmentalize. My brain doesn't shut off. And it was very difficult to actually enjoy the time that I got free. The guilt wouldn't go away. Benefit of hindsight, I wish I could have compartmentalized it a little bit more, and maybe been a little bit more disciplined around saying, right, that's my time to do this. This is my time. And I tried, but my mind sort of overrode. I did go for the walks, but my mind was still working on, oh, I must do this. And, oh, I haven't spoken to that person yet. I need to follow up on this. And that's the way my mind was going, as opposed to saying, oh, look at this beauty around me, the blue skies, beautiful area. You know, I probably missed some of that because I couldn't switch off mentally. And that was probably the anxiety. And I have suffered with that from time to time during my life. But yeah, it was actually, I suppose, prayer was an answer to that, because prayer did quieten me, and it quietened my mind. But I still feel guilty now if I take I think my husband's away this week, so I try to walk the dogs during daylight. So I'll come back and do some work. I think, unfortunately, it's a little bit of my nature. And I always, I'm working longer hours. At the moment, I'm paid 2.5 days plus my Wesley role, and I'm working much longer than that. But even then, when I take time off, which is actually time I'm not being paid for, I still feel guilty. And actually, a dear friend of mine, who's actually my old minister, he's a bishop, he said to me, the problem with people like you and going into non-profits, this is the issue with non-profits, is that they prey on the diligent. In terms of that busyness, if you want something doing, give it to a busy person. And I've always challenged with switching my mind off. So in hindsight, I wish I'd maybe done meditation. I don't know. I probably could have done something better to actually bring about, I suppose, productive relaxation, where I did actually quieten down and actually get some rest during that period as well. And I went and launched into this new role and a busy life again up here in Queensland, and I probably didn't get the full benefits of the time that I had during that transition. So if that's any advice to any of you going through it, make sure you do get the balance in that, and try. I can't preach to you on this one because I failed, but try to relax and enjoy it, and compartmentalize. That doesn't mean take your foot off the pedal and don't try and don't look for a role, don't look for your next opportunity. Just contextualize it and know and believe in yourself that it will come. And I suppose patience, one of the fruits of the spirit, have patience, which is not my strong point.
Your comment, Tracy, is so helpful, because I often quote Tim Chen, who most of you know, when he was going through transition, and he said, on Friday at lunchtime, I shut down my computer, close my books, and I go for a 4-mile or 4-hour bike ride. And he did that every week, as far as I can understand. That's the way that I get the balance. And I think it was scheduled. It was in his diary. So he didn't feel guilty. That's the way that he was going to keep his mind active and his body fit.
Yeah.
And I think that was helpful, because it wasn't just random. It was actually a chosen discipline that he had. And I think that's what I very often, when I'm coaching people, say to people, look, looking after yourself is absolutely part of the process.
Schedule it in.
Put it in the diary. I had a manager once who used to turn his phone off on a Thursday afternoon, and he was uncontactable unless there was a fire, and that's the way he coped. So I think the guilt is interesting, because we do feel that we ought to be doing something, where actually God says, just wait. There's lots of scriptures that encourage us to do that. Just wait.
We were in a meeting yesterday. I wrote down a couple of things that I think are relevant to what you're talking about, Tracy. the one in particular, God is more interested in where our heart is than he is in our abilities.
Yeah.
Where's your heart? And the other thing that goes along with what you were saying, I love the Corrie ten Boom quote, and also about your friend saying, just screw it up and throw it in the. I love the quote that I saw alongside the road. It was in the Philippines, as a matter of fact, that said, write your plans in pencil and give God the eraser.
Yeah. I think you've shared that one with me before, but it's so true.
Yeah.
So true.
Yeah, we just, we want to be in control. We just want to be in control. And when we're not, we feel out of our comfort zone and guilty too.
I think the thing you've hit on there is allowing ourselves to be vulnerable. It doesn't sit well with me, and other people may feel different about that, but vulnerability doesn't sit well with me. And this is in my faith journal, but there's quotes in from other people that it's faith and inspiration, I suppose. But one of the other quotes is Brené Brown. Are people familiar with Brené Brown? So many of you will be. But one of her quotes is, vulnerability is the birthplace of innovation, creativity, and change, which is so true. But when you're actually living it and breathing it, it's also hard to rationalize because the mind takes over. And so the guilt factor, even though I actually really like your idea, Daniel, of scheduling that downtime, scheduling a 2-hour walk or each day or whatever it be. But my thing is, even when I did it, I felt guilty. So when I was out on my walk, I couldn't switch my mind off to enjoy my surroundings. I'd be thinking about things.
Well, if I can suggest the reason why, it's not a priority. And I think that's what, I mean, I've been coaching in the past. I've been coaching people who are workaholics. And they say, I've no time for my children. My children don't see me from morning till night. Yeah. And I just say to them, I say, well, they're not a priority. Oh, absolutely. They're the number one priority behind my life. I said, no, they're not. And I think that is the point, is what are our priorities? And people say, I can't make time. Well, you can, but just a question of priorities. And I think prioritizing your well-being is part of the transition process. And I often say this to people: if you come for an interview and you feel good about yourself, we probably feel good about you as well. So it's a very, very big part of transition. And I think that's the important thing. I'd like to touch on another point, Tracy, that you mentioned about the feeling of failure when you've got rejection. Because I understand, and I'm not an expert in this, but the rejection, I gather, is the toughest emotion in life to deal with. You know, nobody wants you. I mean, when I was young and I couldn't play soccer, I was always picked last because I was hopeless. Nobody wanted me. And I think, you know, when you have broken relationships or even rejection in a job application, that same emotion comes through, and it's recognizing that it is the toughest emotion, I understand, to deal with. But I'm also going to make the counterbalance to that. Now, looking back on my career, I actually can go through the stages and thank God that I didn't get the job. It's a very interesting process, because several things which I would have thought at the time was a disaster, even one that made me move from one end of the country to the other, it wasn't a disaster. In fact, it would have been a disaster if I'd stayed. And I think looking back is good, but recognizing that is the way God's sovereign plan works in our life, that rejection, which we find hard, or I don't think this job is for you, is pretty tough to get hold of that fact. But looking back, I think, you know, we do believe in the sovereign plan of God, and he knows best. So.
And God may be protecting you from something.
I can actually so empathize with you in that situation. I went through very, very similar feelings. I had a week where things had been ticking over on some roles. I got 4 rejections in 1 week, ones that I'd actually gone to second interview on. And that was really, really hard. One of them in particular. And I was questioning on that, but again, reached out to my friends network and my husband, and I can't remember who the conversation with, but I heard it multiple times. It's not you they are rejecting. It's just that there's a competition and you can't win them all. And there's only one role, only one person can get it. And even if you're down to the short list of 2 or 3, there's still numbers in there. So it's actually saying, this is not personal. This is not about me. It's their choice. and they've not chosen me, but other opportunities will come. And it's actually focusing on that, but other opportunities, and know it, and keeping that trust in your own, and rationalizing it. I mean, one of the things I did is say, okay, if that's not, I had a really bad weekend that week, after 4 rejections in 1 week. And that one stands out as, and that was probably around last September, October. That was really, really hard to deal with. And I got into that little bit of, you know, possibly what you're going through. Well, I'm worthless if I can't get any of these jobs, you know, surely 1 out of 4. And that was actually a really big turning point for me, because I actually then said, okay, I need to not let this get the better of me. And I actually just pretty much had after a miserable weekend, I gave myself 2 full days off. I was still thinking, but I actually filled it with activity, physical stuff that I couldn't sit and mope. I got myself out there, and just by that, it sort of re-energized me physically. And it also, I suppose, cleared my head. I went on lots of walks. At that stage, I played golf and did things like that, and filled my days. I actually kept myself busy, but physically active. And that worked for me to just bring me back and get me back onto the, okay, I've thought through this. It's not me, and carry on. And just, it got me back on track. So I gave myself 2 full days off to give me the mind space, I suppose, the headspace to actually work through it, and actually convince myself, keep saying whatever your quotes are, whatever your little talk to yourself is, your internal voice, just convince yourself that you are worthy. And it's just, that's not the right move for me, but the right move will come up. Have really honest conversations with people and say, look, I'm actually struggling. I could do with some support. Do you want to come on a bike ride with me? Or do you want to do, and actually connect with people? Because when you're in isolation, and I know that I found that quite tricky, you're at home and everybody else seems to be out and employed and doing things, and you're at home. Reach out to people, and actually don't, that thing I had, which was once a day to talk to somebody outside my household. So right. Because mine was during COVID as well, part of it. And right. Reach out to people, because you'd be surprised at how supportive people are, and you need to be reminded. But on the acceptance thing, rejection is very hard. Think about, work is one aspect of your life. If you look at your whole life, look at all the points of acceptance that you do have. Your wife, your family, your friends, your colleagues, your church, whoever it be, your sports cycling groups, whoever it be, they accept you. The job application is only one part of that hasn't accepted you. And that's it, you haven't got the acceptance yet.
So many of us, because we've been working, and I felt this, you know, some of you will know my background. I left a firm that I've been working in for a long time and had a number of months off and went through a lot of these emotions. And I realized a few things. I realized there. The first was that my whole value of myself was tied into my job. You know, it was about who I was about my job. So it's a bit like at the barbecue when people ask, when they ask, you know, they don't ask, who are you? They ask, what do you do? And so your identity is actually tied up with your job. I'm an accountant, or I'm a CFO, I'm a CEO. But actually that's only one very small part of our entire life. That's kind of the first thing. I had to disconnect my sense of identity and value from my job, because my job is not me. And as a Christian, of course, you know, I am a child of God, and you know that's a very different identity from just being my job. The other thing that I found quite helpful actually is I really love this quote, Tracy, you know, from Corrie ten Boom. I mean, never be afraid to entrust an unknown future to a known God. I guess the way I thought about that in my life was years ago, I learned this from somebody who said to me that God actually isn't that interested in your achievements or success in life. that is actually not that material to him. What's really material to him, and this is, the theme of the Bible, is our development to become more and more Christ-like as people, as human beings, to grow in our character. So if we think about that, and I've been pondering that quite a long time, then it really doesn't matter. So if I let go, and that's something that I had to do because I was forced into that situation over those few months, just to let go and say, God, it doesn't really matter. If I never work again in my life in the way that I thought I would, it actually doesn't matter. Of course, it doesn't mean I don't try, I don't do all these activities, everything that's been said around, keeping yourself healthy, networking, blah, 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 all very important. But disconnecting the expectation of success from, in terms of success being in my life is no longer about being able to get another job or being able to do this or that, but it is about, am I really growing in my character? Yeah. To become more Christ-like. If I'm doing that day after day, then I'm successful.
Yeah.
And then just letting God take over and go, at the right time, well, that's a job for you, or there's something you can do here, or there's something you can do there.
Yeah.
It's inverting that kind of thought process. And I found that really helpful for me because it became very freeing, and I related back to what Matthew 11 says, when Jesus said, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And I've always, for a while, been confused about that because, well, how does that work? Because most people think being Christians is hard work because, you got to be good and you got to, try not to sin, and that's really hard work. But actually, if we have let it go and we have entrusted everything to God and left nothing on the table, it actually feels light. It feels easy.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Kokong. I think that's really, really, I suppose, poignant in terms of your journey. But I think what you're focusing on there, and I think this is something that you hit a nail on the head. We often focus on what we are as opposed to who we are. And I think your transition there, it takes time, particularly when you've been in roles for a long time. So if you can focus on who you are, I think that's actually half the battle. So, and that will keep you, because who you are is made up of so many different roles you play in life, with your children, with your partners, your spouse, with your inner circle and close friends, with the outer circle, your friendly acquaintances, your church communities, your sporting club communities. All these communities are focused on who you are. And when you actually contextualize that and say the work is what you do as opposed to what you are, and focus on that, I think it actually can bring some perspective, particularly when you're going through tough times and rejection. You're still who you are, and don't let that diminish rejection from a job, which is relatively, if you think we work a third of our lives during our adult times, and we probably work, so we're talking 8 hours a day out of your 24, so it's about a third. Then if you break it down in, this is the mathematician in me coming out, and so you probably work about 40% of your total life. So what's 40% of a third? Not very much. So work is, if you contextualize it that way, work, whilst important, and I'm not diminishing the importance of work, most people need to earn a living, it's keep it in that context of your total life, and don't let what you are become who you are. So Rick, I will need to go now, Peter, because I've got a call with the US at 9 o'clock, and it's 7 p.m. there. So thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to the group and share my story. I say it was more just a conversation leader, but this group is so valuable. So thank you for the opportunity.